Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Am I
Yeah.
audible to you?
Yes, you're audible.
So can we start?
Why not?
Okay. So a very good afternoon to one and all present here. Today I, Shireen Singh, on behalf of Center for Legal Studies, Geetaradan International Business School, welcome our esteemed guest, Advocate Deepak Anand Masi, and all the attendees on today's personality development workshop on logical thinking and judgment skills. Geetaradan International Business School was established in the year 2004. GIBS is affiliated to Guru Gobind Singh Trust University, Delhi, and is approved by All India Council for Technical Education, Ministry of HRD, Government of India for technical courses, and Bar Council of India for law courses. GIBS has been rated A by National Assessment and Accreditation Council in the second cycle. GIBS has been rated A+ by State Fee Regulatory Committee, a fee committee of Government of Institute of Delhi, and GGS IP University. Center for Legal Studies, GIBS, has been rated highest grading A by Joint Inspection Committee of Government of Institute of Delhi and GGS IP University. GIBS has been graded A by Audit Cell of GGS IP University consecutively from the past 8 years. Also, GIBS has been rated as number 2 Pan India by Times Business School Survey consecutively from the year 2018 and 2019. The guest speaker of webinar today is Advocate Deepak Anand Masi. Sir is a duty counsel at International Criminal Court, Hague, Netherlands, and Advocate Supreme Court of India. Sir has nearly 15 reported judgments in Supreme Court of India and in various high courts. Sir is also a founder of an international law firm under the name and style of DAM Property Unity, which has three separate wings: litigation, human rights, and research and analysis. We are honored to have you, sir. Sir, I would now request you to kindly enrich us with your immense pool of knowledge and experiences. Sir, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Shirin, and all the attendees, dear students. Honorable Director, if he's also joining the webinar, gives me immense joy to connect to all of you this afternoon, especially because in this webinar, I have been invited by one of my students. Shirin was my student long time ago, but not very long time ago. And it gives me again happiness and joy both to realize that my students are progressing so well, doing so well in life. Shirin had made a very humble request to me and very politely that, sir, we all, whatever is the theory is written in the book. So I would like you to focus on the cases that you have dealt and share your experiences more from the perspective of case law rather than the purely theoretical perspective. And I happily agreed to Shirin because even reflex-wise, instinct-wise, my way of thinking is that of a litigation lawyer's thinking. A litigation lawyer tends to think in a different way because a litigation lawyer has to deal with layered facts, tempered evidences, misleading statements, and so is the judge. And this is how I begin my the substantive part of my sharing in this webinar. Shirin has told me that the students are mostly fourth semester students. Nonetheless, you all are intending lawyers. In the days to come, years to come, you would be lawyers practicing in any court of the law in India, throughout India. And I remember when I was a law student, once Justice Krishna Iyer visited the campus law center. He spoke too many things, but the most important thing that I remember was that please do mind you are an intending lawyer, and this fact must be visible on your persona. The way you walk, the way you talk, the way you carry yourself, there should be the snap of that culture. And anybody is able to make out without you ever telling that an intending lawyer is coming. And that was very significant message. It carried a lot of, it was a timeless message. The today's topic, logical thinking and judgmental skills. They are as much a legal topic as much a topic of general discussion. Logical thinking is nothing but a relationship, a sensible relationship between the conclusion and the regions, a cause and effect analysis. And so is the judgmental skills. We all make judgments in our lives for the things that concerns us. Here, this topic assumes a different purpose and meaning in the context of law. Because as a lawyer and as a judge, when you are making decisions, you are not only supposed, but you have to make it objectively. Otherwise, the conclusions you draw, the judgments we make, they are subjective because primarily they are related to things that affect us personally. But in the context of law, we are dealing with, be it a judge, be it a lawyer, they are doing their job. The cases that I have dealt or you may be dealing, the cases that the judgments that the judges write, none of them may ever affect them personally. And therefore, it assumes a different character in the context of legal field where the judgmental skills and logical thinking becomes more objective than the subjective in the nature. You all must have read in you, perhaps, or might be starting to learn or reading the basic principles, the touchstone principles of how to draw conclusions, how to arrive at a judicial decision, how you might have read many judgments in your college thus far. And even not in the college, but this generation, I believe, is a very informed generation. You have an instrument called, some technology called internet, which exposes you to the whole universe of knowledge. You can just Google it, how a particular judgment was arrived at, how the skills developed. Logical thinking is natural, instinctive way of thinking of a prudent man. The law accepts the standard of how a prudent man would react, would think. But judgmental writing is a skill that is acquired over a period of time. And today's judge, they are enriched by the experiences of nearly 3 centuries because they read the judgments, previous judgments. They read the facts. The judgments, some of the judgments are overturned later on. In all jurisdictions, be it common law countries, be it civil law countries, but judgments are overruled. So overlapping of wisdom, overlapping of reasoning, recall of reasoning, reconsideration of reasoning, all these things go to polish our skills. And we slowly and gradually start learning how to rationalize things, how to understand things in a proper context. I remember one of the famous statement of Austin in his book, Aspects of Justice. In his book, Aspects of Justice, he writes that when we sink to the lowest, we clutch for the excuses to the highest. Yeah. When he was laying down this proposition of law, jurisprudential principle, he has the wisdom, essence of wisdom of what has been transpiring in the courts. He had facts before him, how the facts were manipulated, how the facts were layered, how the witnesses became deceptive, how they altered their statements, how they even lied on oath in the courts of law. And he went on to writing this fact, this line. But it is a conclusion. It's a conclusion he is drawing. Now, when we talk about logical thinking and judgmental skill, it involves conclusions because judgment involves conclusions. It involves logical thinking, which means rationalizing the fact and correlating it to the law. When we rationalize the fact, then we proceed to examine it in the context of law. Then comes the statute. Once the statute comes, the question of interpretation arose. Because statutes enact something, it's an act of parliament, it's done today. And we are never able to foresee the challenge of future. But the statute essentially has to deal with the challenges of the future. So the interpretation, how to interpret it in a given circumstance, which was never foreseen by the lawmaker, the statute maker. Glenville William writes in his book, you may write that in the name of the book and can read it. It's a small book, Learning the Law. In his book, he writes, legal profession is a prophetic profession. Because you have to contemplate today what is likely to happen after years from today, which is likely to happen sometimes after decades from today, particularly in a legal system as crowded as we have in India, where the trial goes on for years and years and years and for decades. You have to contemplate things that would be decided, that's likely to be decided long time after you are drawing the premises. So he writes that it's a prophetic job, and I completely agree with him. So is the case with the statute. Statute makers, compelled by the circumstances of the day, of the time, they go on to enact a law. But the way world is changing, the modern world is changing, and the way it has changed in the last 3 decades, that surprises everyone. It brings enormous challenges for the judiciary, for the lawyers. The technology, the tools that are available to us by virtue of technology, it enhances human ability as well as human ability in both ways, negative and positive. We are more skilled today in engineering a fact, and we are equally skilled in engineering the absence of the existence of the fact. We engineer the fact, we engineer the absence of the existence of the fact. When we engineer anything, the job of a lawyer and job of a judge becomes too complicated. And he has to rely completely upon his wisdom. What we say in legal term, we use equity, justice, and good conscience. He has to actually pull every bit of his cognitive faculties many a times to arrive at a conclusion, because facts are so layered, they are so deceptive. And in some of the cases, nobody will ever know what is the truth. For example, let me take it one recent example of international realm, that Alexei Navalny's case. All of you must have heard his name. He is the prominent opposition leader and human rights activist in Russia. He was drugged. He was intoxicated, and it was a fatal drugging. He survived. It was a nerve agent that was, he was in fact attacked by that nerve agent. In as long as he was under treatment in Moscow, the official statement of the government and the hospital was that he suffered a major serious allergic attack. But moment he was shifted to Berlin hospital, the doctors found the traces of Novichok. That nerve agent is called Novichok. And the theory emerged that it was the Kremlin's job, Kremlin's hand. That means Putin's hand, and state machinery is negating. Navalny is back in Russia, back in jail. We would never know with certainty whether he was drugged or not. Both way is equally possible. Opposition engineers things that impute motive to the public at large. So do the rulers. So we would never know. In most of the genocide cases, the details, we seldom know the exact details. The cases of ethnic cleansing, we seldom know the exact details. We simply see over a period of time the extinction of something or the effect of something, and we look back and relate it to the causes. It's a tremendous job. And suppose I am asked to comment who is true. Putin's administration is speaking correctly that there was no drugging, or the Berlin hospital doctors claim is genuine that he was drugged. I would say I would prefer to believe the Berlin hospital. Prefer to believe. I don't know the exact truth, but I prefer to believe the Berlin hospital because they have lesser reasons to engineer a deception than Mr. Putin has. Because Mr. Putin had at the stake his entire political career and the throne of Russia. So I would say I prefer to believe Mr. Berlin hospital. I prefer to believe Alexei Navalny's case version of this thing. This preference of basing your belief or accepting a belief that is propagated, this preference is nothing but logical thing. This preference is the judgmental skill. There won't be any judicial inquiry into it. European Union demanded for an independent international inquiry, which Russia outrightly rejected. Said no, there is no need. There won't be, and even if there would be, these facts are never ascertained completely. There would always remain ambiguity. All I have is not a judgment written by a court of law which has gone into the questions of evidence, which has heard the parties, which has seen the cross-examination. All I have is the reports and my own logical thinking and judgmental skill to base on a decision. decision. Dear students, there can't be, in my limited knowledge, there can't be a better understanding, a better example to illustrate how logical thinking functions in a lawyer's life, in a judge's life, how how we have to groom ourselves, we have to polish ourselves. Let me tell you one thing. When we are young, we have fire within. But the fire that is wild is a bit destructive. But as we grow, but the fire that is put in furnace is productive. All the minerals and ores, gold, diamond, whatever, we need the fire in the furnace. That's a great deal of advocacy. To discipline our cognitive faculties, to keep disciplining our cognitive faculties in a particular way, in order to be able to arrive at a just conclusion. Let me cite one more example, and that's to some it may appear an illustration from mythology rather than history. It's the famous proverbial illustration of King Solomon's judgment. In King Solomon's court, two women came claiming the motherhood of one child, and they both were equally passionate, crying, helpless, miserable. It was extremely difficult to distinguish and discern which one was speaking truth. The King Solomon's, we all know the story. King Solomon said, all right, cut the child in two pieces, give one each to both of them. The woman who was not her mother agreed to it, but the woman who was actually the mother said, no, I don't want that. I want child to be alive. Let it be with her. And King Solomon arrived at the conclusion, she's the mother. And the child's custody was given to her. It was the disciplined cognitive faculty of King Solomon. It is the disciplined cognitive faculty of the judges and jurists and academicians that has contributed and helped us to arrive at where we are today. We are dealing with all the challenges. Now, when I talk about the logical thinking, the way whatever I have spoken, we have to analyze the facts, rationalize it. When you say analyze it, rationalize it, then to draw, in order to be able to draw conclusions that are sensible, equitable, fair, and not short-circuiting any express provision of law. It's very great work of charity to donate Taj Mahal to a number of thousands of slum dwellers. They have no home. But if suppose the court orders that, it would be condemned widely. So the judgments that are sensible, that are equitable, that are based on facts and evidence, and does not short circuit with any express provision of law. Because Taj Mahal is the national property. Courts can't, we can't do charity. So it has taken centuries of experience for the judges and jurists and academicians and the professional lawyers, litigation lawyers, to develop different rules of interpretation. Because the courts mostly felt the challenges, and common law country courts, the challenges of new upcoming challenges. Challenges to deal with the upcoming challenges. The problem to deal with the upcoming challenges. Since 100 years ago, there was less cross-border movement, cross-border trade, cross-border relationship, transatlantic, trans-Pacific, Vasco da Gama or Columbus. But today is different. Lakhs of millions of people, barring this corona lockdown, cross the Atlantic and Pacific, and there are cross-border movements on daily basis. These enhance global chain activity, increase the challenges manifold. And the courts, common law courts, particularly the English court, because they have led the development of, they have contributed very significantly in the development of the legal system. But they realize that the tremendous challenge they face is the challenge of interpretation of the statute. Because the statute that enacted 100 years ago, our Indian Penal Code itself is 1876 by Lord Baker. Of course, there are subsequent amendments. But the challenge is each passing century, the stature of the challenge, the complexity of the challenge, the degree, it's enormously rising. At one hand, the experience, the legal experience, judicial experience were saturating and were guiding the judges and the lawyers and the courts and the jurists. But at the other hand, the problems had been rising exponentially. And to deal with that, they developed many rules, and you must have read, or maybe you will read in the days to come, the golden rule of interpretation. It should be the Hayden's rule of interpretation. The golden rule of interpretation is very simple, that statute must be understood in plain and simple way in order to give the effect of the intention of the legislature. But the Hayden's rule is totally different. It was a court-led rule of the interpretation. And in Hayden's case, the court says, look, the statute is here to aid the common law. Common law is the principal organ, and statutes are there just to aid and assist the common law. So the statute had to be interpreted in the wider context of what falls within the four pillars of common law system and qualifies on the criteria of equity, justice, and good conscience. Dear student, I recollect some of the instances now, and I go back to those cases that I have dealt. In the very early days of my career, I was dealing with the case of sealing of unauthorized properties in Delhi. They were situated in Pappankala, Delhi. It's the year 2000. I was a lawyer with just 2 years standing. And it was a stroke of destiny that kind of case came to me. 4,500 families, 1,500 homes in 3 sectors of Pappankala. The DDA and the MCD, they were stealing the properties indiscriminately. And the reason was that the property was allotted to slum dwellers on the condition that they are not going to sell it, and most of them sold it. Here it discloses one more peculiar human motive. that while drawing conclusions, it's not always prudent to favor in the side of all those who are oppressed and poor. They all were oppressed and poor swindlers. They gave government the undertaking, but they sold out. So the occupants who were residing, they were in a way illegal occupants, and the government started sealing it. And for 4,500 houses, just imagine the number of people affected by it. There was hue and cry. The case came to me. I decided, limit on my limited understanding of law, that we file 3 separate writs for 3 separate uh, sectors. Because filing 3 writs gives me 3 chances, and chances to present my case before, maybe before 3 different benches. Because legally, it was an open and shut dead case. Lesser can't have better rights than the lessee. The first case, the first writ petition, and it was a class action writ petition. There is a provision in CPC Order 1 Rule 8 that talks about bringing a class action. Class action differs from the public interest litigation. In public interest litigation, the petitioner is not supposed to have any vested legal interest. But in a class action litigation, every petitioner is supposed to have the vested legal interest in the case. So it went before Justice M.K. Sharma, single judge bench of Delhi High Court. Justice M.K. Sharma later on became the Supreme Court judge. He initially agreed to pass this status quo order, but later on refused. We went in appeal, latest patent appeal. Came before the bench of Justice Arijit Prasad. He was then the Chief Justice of India. Chief of the Delhi High Court. And he took a very stern view, lesser can't have better rights than lessee, and these people are exploiting the resources. They were allotted homes, they sold it out, and they must have put their a new slum somewhere else. So this way we will never be able to solve the problem. And he was precisely right. And that's what has been happening in Delhi. But my job was to secure relief. The second writ petition went before Justice Anil Dev Singh. A different bench. And I proposed something which was not technically a very legal argument. I said, very well, but after having paid revenue, so much revenue to the state, can't they be worse than a licensee? And if they are not worse than licensee, can they be sealed without notice the way it's happening? Some child is inside sleeping and parents outside and the home is locked and now there is a medical emergency. Does it qualify Article 14 and Article 21? Does this way of acting meets the standard, acting by the state and its agency meets the standards laid down in Article 14 and 21? And they halted. Subsequently, of course, the political parties intervened and some resolution was brought about. It was not a very strong legal argument, perhaps, but they deserved remedy because there was a serious contributing negligence on the part of the state. Second case I would refer, I just made the notes because it's down the memory lane for the last 4 or 5 years and mostly into international practice. That was the case of a student of Don Bosco School. That's a reported judgment again. Master Gaurav Puri versus Don Bosco School or State of Delhi and others, something like that. The student was refused promotion from class 5th to class 6 on the ground that school had a policy, brought a policy that year only that any student who fails to secure less than 45% mark shall not be promoted to the next class. We challenge it. They It's Don Bosco School. They have elaborate and very illustrious legal team to defend themselves. They don't like interventions, and that happened. They attacked the maintainability of the petition. My petition was in the backdrop of a 17 bench judgment by the Supreme Court, largest ever so far, that is TMA Pai case judgment, where the Supreme Court defined the rights of the minority institutions. And in that judgment, they almost given sweeping powers. So they said how it is maintainable, it's our internal matter. Very well. And Justice Bikramjit Sen was hearing the petition. Again, Justice Bikramjit Sen went on to become the Supreme Court judge later on in his initial days. I knew that very well. If I attack it on two technical arguments, it's again a lost case. But I went with a different proposition of law. I said, my lord, the policy that has been devised by the school is that if a child fails to secure 45% mark, he would not be promoted. But if the next year also he fails to secure 45% mark, he would be promoted because he can't be withheld in one class for eternity. So I said, my lord, what's the policy? Policy is either you secure 45% mark or you fail twice. Is this a policy? This is a case of maladministration. And this is where my case is. With I am not hit by TMA Pai judgment, because TMA Pai judgment says court can intervene and interfere in the cases of maladministration. So it's not about promotion, Lord. It's about maladministration. It's a case of maladministration. And a decision that is arising out of a bad decision cannot be sustained. And court agreed. Yes. It was my way of thinking that what is this policy? Lengthy argument on maintainability, but the essence of argument was very simple. Is it a policy? Either you secure 45% marks or you fail twice. It was a logical thing. And court happily accepted it because it was the court's judgmental skill that true, it's a maladministration. What is this? This is a cock and bull story. One more judgment I would share with you, with all of you, and hope it's not getting boring for all of you. And that's very, very important judgment and landmark case, reported judgment, and not only reported judgment, but the case played very significant role in my career. And I was dealing with an extradition matter. I was the defense counsel of one of the most wanted and celebrated underworld don, namely Bablu Srivastava. Mr. Srivastava has been brought by way of extradition from Singapore to face trial in 4 cases. After he landed in India, he was slapped with 84 new cases. And he was brought even before I became a law student. I was yet a law student, first year law student. He was brought in 95, just completed the first year. So by the time case came to me, there's a lengthy history of legal battles and top lawyers, Ramjit Mulani, Mr. Ramjit Mulani, Mr. Salman Khurshid, lawyers of that stature had been appearing on his behalf. And I went on, the case that I was handling related to a murder trial pending in the state of Karnataka, Hubli, precisely the town. And he was wanted in that case. Other co-accused, most of the co-accused were acquitted. He was still wanted. Why he was wanted? Because he was never produced. Why he was not produced? Because 84 cases, where he'll go? Unlike today, there was no facility of video conferencing those days. So where would he go? 84 cases. The Z category security. He is still given Z category security. So it's a tremendous task for a state to move him from one prison to other prison, from one court to other court, and it was hanging. So I went to the Supreme Court by way of a transfer case. And I knew there was no case for transfer. Whereas transfer is done of that entire trial. Many accused persons were already acquitted. So technically, how petition is maintainable? I came before the bench of Justice P.V. Jeban Reddy and Justice Tarun Chatterjee. But I said, my lord, they had to, his first sharp comment of the bench was that you are an underworld don, and therefore you do not deserve a remedy in equity. And my response was, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. There was a pin drop silence. The moment I said it, they never repeated this question. But I proposed that let there be no transfer. I am before the Supreme Court simply suggesting, try me and punish me. I am wanted in a murder case. I am here in Government of India's custody. In the state of UP, he was put in UP jail at that point of time. But wherever I am, try me, punish me. But as an under trial prisoner, can I go in life imprisonment? Is it this situation? Is it tenable? And they agreed again. They laid down the law and they changed the entire jurisprudence of warrant case. How? Because in warrant case, prior to that judgment, accused was not at liberty to make appearance through the counsel, unless until his or her formal arrest is effected in that case. At least once the magistrate is produced before the concerned magistrate. But then they exempted it. It's all like, no. In someone case, we do allow it, why not in warrant case? And just in less than 3 months' time, he was a free man from that case, because they exempted him from personal appearance, except once. That's a defense statement. So he had to travel just once, and he was less than 3 months' time. He was a free man in that case. It was again not perhaps not very lengthy academic job. My petition was also very simple. It was a humble submission, punish me. I knew that because I knew who I was defending. So saying too many things, they'll just throw the petition on my face. And if you guys have been to the Supreme Court ever, I feel sorry for you people, because you must be missing a lot of action due to the COVID. Otherwise, exposure to courtrooms are certainly very gainful experiences. But if you haven't been to, I pray and hope that soon things will be normal and you would be. 94 to 95 special petitions out of 100 are dismissed in less than 36 seconds time. You have just a split second to make or unmake your case. And I said, so I knew it. That is not the doctrines that are going to help us. Just one line, punish me. I am a sinner, agree, punish me, but I can't be an under trial prisoner for eternity. Court agreed. They laid down the law, changed the jurisprudence of the warrant cases. Dear students and Sharon, well, thank you very much for giving me the chance to go back in my own experiences, to cite some of them. It's such an enormous, it's such a topic where I can possibly speak for hours and hours and hours. In quickly 2 minutes time, I'll refer to one more case that's famously known as Samba Spy case. You can Google it right away. The students who have your smartphones, Samba Spy case. It's one of the most controversial cases of military jurisprudence, of service law in India. 42 commissioned army officers were tried on charges of spying for the ISI. Charges were serious, that they have passed secret information about the orbit. Orbit is the order in which army moves in the event of war. They have sold out the orbit information to ISI. 42 officers were cashiered from services, convicted for life sentence, and it happened in 70s. You know, the incident relates to a period when I was not even born. And by the time the case came to me, there have been multiple rounds of litigation in the High Court and in the Supreme Court. And doors were shut, cases were dismissed. When I dealt two of these cases, two of those 42 cases, one was one Havildar was died, who was actually murdered in the military intelligence custody. And it was like his death was faked. Again, the military intelligence engineered too many facts. And one was the lead accused, Captain R.S. Rathore, who allegation against him was that he traveled to the Pakistan, crossed the border and handed over the secrets to. But when I was standing before the court in 2011, before the bench of Justice Aftab Alam and R.M. Lodha, Justice R.M. Lodha went on to become the Chief Justice of India, I knew that pressing the case on technicalities is the end of my case. Because I am dealing with a case which has been dismissed by the Supreme Court multiple times, by the High Courts multiple times. What I have new to say. And Union of India brought Solicitor General, Mr. Gopal Subramaniam, he was then Solicitor General of India, to defend the case, to oppose the petition. And Solicitor General took a stand that if we entertain, irrespective of the facts that have been disclosed in my petition, if we entertain, the Supreme Court entertains this petition, that would amount to insulting the competence of the previous bench, which we say normally res judicata, doctrine of constructive res judicata, stare decisis, that courts will not change the previous judgments without some very, very strong reasons. And he was assisted by Additional Solicitor General Mrs. Indra Jaising. It was one of the most fascinating experience of my life. Jam-packed court, except the Chief of the Army Staff, all top brass of the Army, including Director General of the Military Intelligence, press and media. And I said, Lord, Justice Aftab Alam, I still remember, he even took up the paper book to throw it out. He took up, he was not throwing, no, nothing. The lawyers in the courtroom, they rushed to me to rescue, in order to rescue me, to suggest me something so that the petition is not dismissed. I just said, relax. I said, I went on to, I knew that I had to face the challenge. So I was prepared and I decided that split second that I am switching from Indian jurisprudence to US jurisprudence. There's a case called Herrera's case in United States. In Herrera's case, United States Supreme Court laid down the law that irrespective of the fact that somebody had filed multiple writ petitions, successive writs, abusive writs, but if he finally brings a colorable case of actual guilt or innocence, he is entitled for a federal writ. I said, I am before the Supreme Court of India. That's a federal court, counterpart of the US Supreme Court. I am asking a federal writ. Are your lordship going to overlook the facts merely because somebody else has overlooked it? Is this court not going to examine whether I have brought a colorable case or not? And that was the time Justice Aftab Alam said, Mr. Subramaniam, we want the answer from you, not from the Solicitor General. Mr. Gopal Subramaniam never appeared thereafter in the court. He took time to seek instruction, never appeared in the court. Next day, Additional Solicitor General Mrs. Indra Jaising appeared and said, Mr. Solicitor General is indisposed of, and court said, issue notice, petition advocate. You know? It was again a logical thing. But it was battle of nerves. It was battle of perseverance. No established principles were going to help me in all the cases that I have discussed with you. my own teaching that I had from my seniors and my teachers, that it's simplify. Let's simplify. A lawyer simplifies the fact. Logical thinking is just to simplify things objectively. That brought the results that changed the law. So I think I have exceeded the time, perhaps, but it was such an interesting topic. I couldn't help it. Shirin, thank
Yes,
you
sir.
once again. Thank you once again for inviting me. I hope I didn't disappoint either
No,
your students or any of you, and perhaps you have heard and learned
sir,
a bit.
it's always wonderful to hear you.
Ah, thank you. You are my student, so obviously that's the most obvious comments.
No, no,
Once
that's
again,
not. So we have
uh,
some questions for you from
uh-huh,
my students.
please.
I'll verbally tell you. So one
Mhm.
of my students is asking, can you please elaborate what is a federal writ?
Very well. Writs are writs, and there are writs are issued by the High Court and to enforce the fundamental right. When the Supreme Court issues the writ, it's a federal writ. The Supreme Court is a federal court. You know, we are not a federal democracy. We are a mixed, neither unitary nor federal, but we are a mixed. But federal in the legal context means the top court of the country. In India, we have only one top court, one Supreme Court. But in United States, every state has its own Supreme Court. Supreme Court of New York, Supreme Court of Massachusetts, Supreme Court of Oklahoma, Supreme Court, every state. And then there is one federal Supreme Court, Supreme Court of United States. When Supreme Court of United States issues a writ, it's called federal.
So another question is that sometimes the judges are influenced by certain external factors.
Uh,
So how does this affect or how does this justify the concept of equity, justice, and good consent? When the
uh,
judges are influenced by certain external factors, it could be anything. So how does it justify all these three principles?
Shiren and the student whosoever has asked this question, this is a complex question to answer. And most of the litigation lawyer have a lot to say about it. See, when the judge is influenced by any external factor, be it a mental predisposition, be it a pre-existing relationship with the client or the attorney, be it the influence of the deep state, things become very murky. And then it is never equity, conscience, and equity, justice, and good conscience. No doubt about it. And in fact, one of my research topic is the deep state influence in the court. And I have written a letter to all the judges of the Supreme Court who participated in Ayodhya Mandir judgment, that had your judgment been similar, had that mosque, the disputed structure, been in existence, would your judgment have been similar? Because then you have to demolish it. They had to demolish it. They had to order first the demolition. And nobody answered it. All the judges, nobody directly answered it. I don't say that bench was here influenced or not, but deep state influence, I put a specific question that it gives me a reason to think people like me that deep state effect was visible in this case. And it's for the generations are going to discuss about it. So it happens, and the litigation lawyer has to deal with it, and therefore there are so many tiers of the decision: the trial court, high court, which is court of appeal also, the Supreme Court. So somewhere you will find good judges, and sometimes it defeats the justice also, and that's the mixture. No system is perfect.
So then what is the recourse which is available to the lawyer in such a scenario when the judge is influenced by the factors? What can a lawyer do in such a case?
Sharon, depends. What is the Judiciary, which judge? It's a trial judge. You have recourse of appeal. And in India, if we see first appeal, second appeal, be it civil matters, criminal matters, you can go up to the Supreme Court by the special petition. But the Supreme Court judge is influenced. It's the end of the matter. But it never ends till it ends. Let me tell you one thing for a litigation lawyer. And make it a point. It never ends till it ends. Let me cite one case. It was not the influence judgment, Timothy John Evans case. That was the first case where a dead person was posthumously declared innocent, and the government of Great Britain paid 2.5 million pound as damages to his half sister. He was earlier convicted by on two counts of manslaughter of his wife and his stepdaughter. But what happened? The lawyer was not satisfied, and Timothy John, he believed Timothy John that he didn't kill him. And a journalist, the lawyer, they made it a pursuit of their life. And they generated so much of discussion that led to the formation of a committee. The committee submitted its report, and the report was that the language used, it was more probable than not that Timothy John Evans might have killed his wife and his half-daughter. More probable than not. The report was tabled before the House of Commons in UK Parliament, and they accepted it and tendered unconditional apology. The state tendered unconditional apology posthumously. The certificate was issued posthumous. But there is a contrast. Let me cite one more judgment, ADM Jabalpur judgment. ADM Jabalpur judgment, you all might have read about it, heard about it, or will read about it, will hear about it. During the emergency time, it relates to the power of government to suspend the fundamental rights. And during emergency, Justice P.N. Bhagwati led bench upheld it. That all that even without due process of following the due process of law, the state is able to curtail the personal liberty in emergency. Justice H.R. Khanna is sitting on the bench. He dissented. It was a dissent judgment. He didn't agree. Later on, the ADM Jabalpur judgment was overturned. But what happened, Justice P.N. Bhagwati, who was the Chief Justice of India, had to acknowledge one day that it was a great mistake, that the judgment was the greatest error of his judicial career. Not only that, he publicly tendered an apology for writing that judgment, ADM Jabalpur. Even today we talk about ADM Jabalpur, that it was the darkest hour of Indian judiciary. So it never ends till it ends. Some lawyer was appearing in ADM Jabalpur case on behalf of Srikant Shukla, who was the petitioner, who was in custody. But it never ends till it ends. Make it a point. Someday you may lose it in the court, but make it a point not to lose the trust of the client and not to lose your faith in yourself. Carry on if you believe in it for the right professional reasons. Okay, Siri.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an enlightening and informative session. I thank on my behalf of students and on the behalf of the Institute for taking out time and to give such valuable lesson to my students. Thank you so much, sir, for joining.
Thank you, Shirin, once again, and all of you. Follow the COVID appropriate behavior. Carry yourself with safety, and stay home. Things are not very good these days. So, and have a great weekend. And thank you, Shirin, for my weekend starts on a high note because of you.
Thank you so much.
It's a thorough joy. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.